Okay, how do you know that you're right, generally speaking? And I don't mean, here's what I don't mean by that. I don't mean, how do you know you're right to like a very, like a simple and perhaps even a non-consequential a piece of data or a statement. Okay, like for example, all right, Benjamin Franklin had a pet dog named Benny. It's like, okay, true or false? It's like, how do you know you're right to that question? Well, I'm not really concerning myself with that question. Uh, uh, its answers don't seem to have a an impact either way on my life. Though I'm not unconvinced that the methodologies that we would use to determine if that were true or false would not be the same methodologies that we use to determine larger truths with. But um, how do you know? How do you when is when is evidence sufficient enough for you to believe a claim or for you to believe something? And something that I was told a long time ago that really resonated with me is the more you begin to philosophically investigate reality, the more reality kind of dissolves and dissipates right before you. Whatever this experience is for hundreds and thousands of years. Well, just yeah, you know, people, thinkers of all schools have had tremendous disagreements as to what this was, and so with no real ability to discern what between them was true. Um, I just got done reading uh, works by Schopenhauer, and I've moved on now. Um, but reading him in contrast with reading a couple other kind of really interesting thinkers like Sartre and Camus um, and Voltaire specifically, it just made me think. As someone who wants to understand more, who feels that it's important to understand my relationship with whatever this is, I'm struggling to know what is true or not, and when to determine, or when not to, excuse me, when to realize that I do have sufficient evidence to believe certain claims. Like when is enough? How deep can you go? Um, down the path of skepticism, which I think is a really helpful and ultimately one of the best skill sets you can have is a skeptical mind. Um, but yeah, I don't know what that guy said to me a long time ago. The fact that reality begins to disappear, the more you begin to investigate it. That seems more and more true. I seem to, over these years of studying, now have more questions, and maybe I've answered a few, but I seem to have a bucket load of more questions, which admittedly is something I assumed and I expected, but um, uh, I still am struggling. One of the questions that I'm still struggling with is how do I understand? How do I know? When can I be convinced of something? Um, and maybe I never will. Maybe that's the lesson or the punchline, if you will. Maybe you never will. Maybe I'm gonna spend my whole life trying to figure it out and die just the same. I don't know. When do you resign yourself to ignorance? When do you keep going? And are there are there truth to most of the questions that we're asking ourselves? Brian McGee has this magnificent book called Ultimate Questions. I read that many years ago. Um, and in that book, he says, look, sometimes we're not even asking the right questions. Sometimes the questions that we're asking are far too big and they encompass too much stuff to even have an answer. Sometimes there are ultimate questions in which don't have an answer because the very act of questioning them. It might just be a human phenomenon. I mean, you think about the word why, and that word is such a versatile word. When you use the word why to ask something, you can be asking about so many things. You can be asking about why it works the way it is, why it is there, in an immediate physical sense, like who put that there or what put that there, or why is it functioning in the way that it's functioning. In a deeper sense, like what's the purpose? I mean, there's so many different avenues of inquiry you can go down when you're using the word why, and I wonder how many of them actually have answers in reality. Like, okay, obviously we can investigate and get to a point in which we understand why something is functioning the way that it is in its material sense, and we can understand why it's there, as in, who put this there. Like, we can understand perhaps how it got there, but that deeper, that underlying, like, what's its reason for functioning? What's its purpose? That might be a question that exclusively lives in the abstract, that doesn't reside at all in our reality, because it's, well, I don't know why. I'm not sure yet, but I've been thinking about that a lot.